he donated a bunch of money to University of Harvard, and they started a study called, today is known as the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It was a longitudinal study to study the health of young men. That was initially how the design of the study. Today is one of the largest, longest, and most famous studies in the world. And it started with Harvard students who enrolled into Harvard, and they were studying these students to figure out what makes young men develop lives that are healthy, happy, and successful. After a couple of years, they also added some students from Boston, some teens actually, that were from disadvantaged communities. And during this study, the participants will undergo extensive on-campus medical exams and psychological interviews and fill out detailed surveys for the rest of their lives. Some of the two first participants in the study, one was named Godfrey Camille, okay? Early on, researchers determined that he was a neurotic hypochondriac, and he had, quote unquote, one of the bleakest childhoods I'd ever seen, one of the researchers noted. Once he got to Harvard, he instantly became overwhelmed. He would see the infirmary quite regularly. And one physician noted that that this boy was turning into regular psychoneurotic. He was skinny, physically weak, and he struggled to make friends. He enrolled in the military in World War II, but he was honorably discharged shortly after. He attended medical school after World War II, and once he graduated, he tried to commit suicide. Shortly after, his mother died, and she had her own host of dysfunctional background, and his sister died. He was 35 years old. He was hospitalized for 14 months with pulmonary tuberculosis. And he told the researcher, "I was glad to be sick. I can go to bed for a year." They also interviewed another young man. His name was John Marston. He was an exceptional student, and he came from a wealthy family. He also served in World War II, and afterwards he went to the University of Chicago, became a lawyer, and he graduated at the top of his class. He became a public servant lawyer, got married, and started a successful private practice. And this study, also known as the Grant study, after Billy Grant, it was designed to be objective, to just look at the development of these young men and then determine, based on the data, what determines whether or not someone ends up being happy and have these successful lives, healthy lives. But the researchers, they knew that Godfrey Camille, he probably would end up not happy, and then John would end up happy and successful. In 1954, the money ran out. Billy Graham was done paying for the survey because of the study, because he didn't get the results that he wanted to be conducted to his own business. And essentially, the funding ran out. All the final reports were put in boxes at Harvard University down in the basement. And then in the early 1970s, some researchers stumbled upon these boxes of all this data, studying all these young men, and started digging into it. And they started tracking down the participants to see if they continue to study and see how are these young men doing. And they got a hold of Godfrey Camille. He was in his 50s. He was a different person. He was married. He was a leader in his church. He had founded a large independent clinic with support of the whole Boston medical establishment that specialized in allergy treatment. He was a nationally recognized expert on asthmatic patients, and he was often asked to speak at symposiums on television. His daughters called him an exemplary father, and they conducted follow-up studies on Camille every 2 years. And each time, it was noted by researchers, he seemed happier than ever. And he died at age 82. And then the Harvard researchers, they determined that Camille, he was among the top, maybe the top participant in the study by measurement of happiness, health, and satisfaction from life and work. And one researcher wrote, "Who could have foreseen that he would die a happy, giving, and beloved man?" They also got a hold of John Marston. He was also in his 50s. By contrast, he was in terrible shape. He was divorced. He was alienated from his family and children, lived in Cleveland. He did have a successful law practice, but he had very few friends and spent most of his time alone. He reported feeling angry, lonely, and disappointed in life. He remarried a few years later, but he described his marriage as loveless. One researcher actually broke protocol and offered him and his wife to go to therapy. And they went one time, but then they discontinued. Another researcher wrote, he seemed like a broken person. And eventually he stopped responding to these interview requests. And one server turned back to the research unopened, and they found out he had died. And the current resident that lived there had no idea if there was any next of kin. And the research trying to figure out how was it possible that these two people with such different backgrounds, such different starts, could turn out so differently. And there are other examples, similar examples, and they had 7 decades of data to draw upon. For about 2,000 participants, the longest study ever done. And they scrutinized it for some answers. They did find some correlations between parenting, childhood, but the most important variable in determining if someone ended up happy and healthy or miserable and sick, physically, emotionally, was how satisfied they were in their relationships. And they quote, the people that are the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest, mentally, physically, emotionally, at the age of 80. Another researcher said it more bluntly, and this is what they wrote. The most important influence by far on a flourishing life is love. Not romantic love, but deep love connection. They wrote, I quote, love early in life facilitates not only love later on, but also the other trappings of success, such as prestige and even high income. It also encourages the development of coping styles that facilitate intimacy as opposed to ones that discourage it. The people who flourished found love, one researcher observed. And that was why they flourished. And Camille wrote, at the age of 75, he said this, you know what I've learned? I've learned love. So how can we learn love? In 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, it says, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. John wrote that love comes from God, that God is love. And the more we get to know God, the more we will understand love. Yeah. Because God in his essence is love. He radiates love. And the more we understand, the more we internalize, the more we connect, the more we live, the more we dwell, the more we think, meditate, read, pray about God's love, the more we understand God's love. And this love that changes everything. You know, as a church, we are going through the theme of love this year. And just like Camille and John, you know, we have a choice to what we want to focus on. Like, God has given us free will, so we can choose that path or we can choose the other path. And we know from research, from data, that a lot of people end up choosing career. They end up choosing these things that they think are so urgent, but is not the most important. And they end up, like John Marston, sick, miserable, and alone. And that's obviously not God's design. You know, in Matthew 22, which has been our theme scripture, I'm going to read it again today. In Matthew 22, we have the greatest commandment, and we are very familiar with this. I know, but it says, Jesus says this, okay? So Jesus is basically out there preaching, teaching, and then the Sadducees come up trying to trap him. The Pharisees come up trying to trap him. The Herodians come and trying to trap him. And in verse 34, it says, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, test him with this question. Teacher, which is the greater commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So if you have been around Christianity for any amount of time, you probably heard this greatest commandment, right? A lot of us know also that there's different words in Greek for the word love. And here, Jesus uses the word agape or agapeo, which is the verb of the noun agape. And he says that we're called to love with our whole being, our hearts, our minds, our soul, God, and love our neighbor as ourselves. Last week we had a little workshop, and the whole workshop was on loving yourself. And I kind of come back to that because it's such a pivotal thing to be able to love other people as well, the way God calls us to love them. So we're commanded to love. Like God understood that it's that important. So it's not like, if you feel like it today, love your neighbor. But if it's snowstorm is coming your way and it's a little chill in the house and you feel the draft, you're free from loving your neighbor. No, God says you command to love. So these words, okay, if you have storge, all right, that was used by the Greeks as a parent-child type of love. So that automatic love a parent would have for their child. We have the word philia, which we see in the Bible as well, which is a friendship, like a friendship type of love. And typically, right, you connect with people that you connect with, so therefore you have filial love for them. All right. We also have eros, which does not occur in the Bible. That's a physical type of love, and it's like romantic love, which is eros. And then we have this word agape, which is the one word that Jesus uses here. And agape, as many of us probably know, is this idea of it's not an emotion, but it's a will. It's a state of will. And it has the idea that you're obligated, because it's not based on how you feel, but it's based on the conviction. It's based on the belief. It's based on your ability to choose how to love. And C.S. Lewis, he wrote about this in his book, Mere Christianity. And he said that, it's not an emotion, it's a state of will. And he says, do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. One of the first psychologists in the United States, William James, also had a whole theory, act as if. And it's kind of the idea that, hey, if you want to believe something or end up, you need to act as if. So I'm acting as if I drive a Porsche 911. Just a little bit, But this term agapeo, back to agapeo, from the Porsche, or some say Porsche. All right, it means to give yourself totally over to something, to be totally consumed by it, committed to it. Think of like sports. And you see some of these people in the stands. I mean, they seem totally consumed with sport. Right? They're totally committed to it.
Have you seen Mr. Grammy's logo?
Right? I'm not going to mention names, but there are some rumors ruminating. All right, but we can relate to, or maybe something else. I don't know. Taylor Swift. You got any Swifties in here? I don't know. Or maybe it's like you're totally committed to your country, or to your state, or to your family, or to whatever. That naturally, but it's that commitment. Like you're totally committed. You're so in love. It doesn't matter if your team is struggling. You are committed. It doesn't matter if the climate is cold. You are committed to New England. Right? You are committed. Some of the commentaries, and this word is so strong. One commentator said, do what is right and best for someone, even if it involves negative feelings. Think about that. There may be someone in this, let's just start with this room. Maybe there's someone in this room that at some point has rubbed you the wrong way. And you started sensing a negative feeling towards that person. Just making sure. Okay, we're good. Right? But in that state, we know you can still choose how you want to act. And that's what God is saying. God has given you the power, the freedom to choose to love in all circumstances, even if there's a negative feeling. That's the type of love. Another commentator said, it's a deliberate attitude of mind that concerns itself with the well-being of the one loved. Self-sacrificial love, regardless of the unworthiness of the object. And this is obviously a very, very high calling. And Jesus embodied that. Think of Jesus, how he loved everybody. We think of Judas, but there's so many more people that he could have, with his powers, the Herodians, the Pharisees. He's on the cross, he's praying for them. So this is what we're called to do. We're called to love God in this way, this agape way. And when we had our dwelling, the first Sunday we had together, if you were not here, we had a time where it was very interactive. So we looked at this particular passage, and we had the dwelling, and what we did was we broke up in partners, and you were supposed to listen to the other person, what they said, and then we broke into bigger groups, and you share with the group what your partner shared. And there was at least two people that shared this about this passage. They said, what is love? Love is a decision more than emotion. Love can interfere with our emotion. Another person said it's a steadfast commitment. And that's the type of agape love that God is calling us to have. It's a commitment. You make a commitment to love. But what I thought was so important was when you think of this is what we're called to do, right? We were talking a little earlier today with the worship team, and they serve in an amazing way. I want to thank them for all their service. And we talk about it. Sometimes we all can experience, give them a round of applause for leading us in worship and praise. And we can feel at times, or you can feel like, man, your battery is kind of running low. And when your battery is running low, it's harder, doesn't mean it's harder to love someone else, right? Because your batteries are low. And God is saying, love yourself as you love your neighbor. Right? You got to take care of both. It's a balance. Right? You got to fill yourself up with God so you can share that love with other people. But we can choose. God has given us so much power in choosing and building these habits. And I think when you think of love, it's obviously a decision to love. This agapeo type of love. It's a decision to love. And the more you do, I think it becomes like a habit. Like this is what you built this into your spiritual DNA. And it becomes you. It becomes you, that person. Like you love people. Like that's your life. And I think about, in our fellowship, how many people here that I really believe exemplify this type of love. Like it's a commitment. The reason we're here is not because we necessarily like each other naturally. Like I do like you guys, okay? Like I really do. But we understand, like we tend to hang out with people that we naturally click with, right? That's a human tendency. Like we're here because of Jesus. That's our common bond. And I see the love. Like we experienced the love. And it is so, so, so amazing. So you think about it, okay, we're trying to learn more of this love because the bar is is quite high, right? So think about if we start with us, right? So if someone comes in, never been in before, right? We don't know that person. But we can choose, hey, we're going to love them. Like, what does that look like? If someone you never met, what does that look like? How do you love someone? One of my dear friends, he was a missionary in Sweden. They would have these house parties and invite people over. If you've ever been to Scandinavia, if you think people in New England are reserved, try Scandinavia, okay? You'll be in the elevator with someone. Just you and that person. They say nothing. It's like they just look somewhere else. If you live in an apartment complex, your neighbor's right there, that door, you're right here, they won't say hi. It's it's very, very reserved. Aaron has a theory that because it's so cold, they're just shivering all the time. And they're just trying to keep warm so they won't actually, use any energy to communicate to the living person in front of them. But anyways, in that culture, I'm being a little stereotypical, but that's kind of how it is. He would invite people over to his house, and they're like, he was like that, and they would tell him, this is a bit unusual. Like, why are you doing this? He said, I'm a Christian, I'm called to love you, and it's really hard to love if I don't know you. I was like, wow. And they would have this huge parties like in his house, and he was like, that's my attempt. That's how I'm trying to love my neighbors, just to get to know them, right? Because it's a decision. It's a you have the ability, but you have to engage. Because I don't know how you're going to love people or if you don't engage with them. Yeah. I think we, as a fellowship, we can always take the higher. That's what Jesus calls us to do with anybody, right? In our neighborhood, in our jobs, to love them with this agape love. And we talked a lot about this, last time, but we're going to talk about this throughout the year. And hopefully learn more, get deeper and deeper and deeper how this love. Why don't you think about maybe for yourself, like if I am going to grow more in loving God with this agape type of love, this commitment, and myself and my neighbor, like how am I going to do that? How's that going to benefit me? How am I going to feel when I have this type of relationship? Think of Camille, such a dysfunctional background. Try and commit suicide, and then take this huge turn. And the kind of cool thing is we don't know what happened because there's no studies, there's no interviews in that 20-year period. Like, what did he do? Like, what clicked? What was it? Some people say that we're driven by pain or pleasure. Maybe the pain, he felt so much pain, like something gotta give, and maybe he saw his need for God. I don't know because we don't have the data, but he turned. Becomes this amazing husband, this amazing person in his community, this amazing contributor in his church. Like, that's really, really cool. And it's possible to love this way. I think also one thing that really encouraged me is when I think of people that love me this way, obviously my wife, my parents, but I'm going to think through like people that have shown me such unconditional love. Obviously, she sees me all the time. So do your spouse, right? She sees you when you're doing well. She sees you when you're depressed. She sees you when you're down. But they're with you with unconditional love. Amen. That is so, so amazing. I was thinking, tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day. And as a church, we're really trying to study out love. We hand out these stones of love, that we're handing out. You should have one. Just as a physical reminder, anything that helps us to remind us of God's love. And because we need it. Yeah. Like, we need these reminders, right? That God loves us. Even when you think you're maybe not doing well or you're having a hard time, like, God loves you. He wants you to experience that love. He wants you to extend that love. He wants you to be like that cornerstone, right? We were saying earlier today. But to really choose this type of love. And I think, maybe an amazing example, right? Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day. And in 1964, he was in Norway receiving the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35. He was the youngest person up to that point. And as a part of his speech, right, he says this in his speech. And he says, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. Unconditional love will have the final word in reality. Like, what conquers love? Nothing. Love is so powerful. Love is so amazing. Unconditional love. And I just pray and hope that as we study this out, like, we can understand this more. Like, we can understand God's love more. Like, He loves you unconditionally. Mm-hmm. And even as I'm saying it, I know, like, I don't fully understand and grasp God's love. One author wrote one time, if you understand God's love fully, the emotional impact would essentially kill you.
Come, Lord Jesus.
All right, because of that was just how he made sense of it in writing. And as we take communion, I just want you to think about, of course, Jesus. And I thought of this. There are times when I don't like my kids because of their behavior, right? I don't feel like a liking towards them. Because I'm like, what's wrong with you guys? Like, can't you just get it together? Like, why do you have to do this and do that? Like,
Well, my kid's perfect, so.
right. So Amber cannot relate, but for the rest of us,
We're with your Bobby. Been there many times.
You don't like what they do.
right? Yes, I don't. Yes, of course. I was going to get to that. I don't like what they do. Of course, I like my kids, but I don't like what they do. But the feeling can be like, yeah, like it's negative, right? You know, could it be that sometimes when Jesus is watching us, like the feeling, because of what we do, he's like, oh, why are you doing that? Like he's like, oh. I'm speculating, right? I don't know, but could it be that he looks and like, or maybe before you're Christians, right? We lived in ignorance and darkness and all the stuff that it talks about in Ephesians, right? He looks and he's like, he hurts. But he went to the cross not with that type of love. He went with agape love. So even if he looks at us and is like, like, I don't like what you're doing to yourself. But because of his unconditional love, he went to the cross and died. Because it was not based on his emotions, not based on how he's feeling. It was like based on a will, a decision to love. So with that, we're going to pray for communion.